the Full Frame Film Festival, and he is a renowned documentary filmmaker and has won awards. And I know in the newsletter that we shared a lot of information about some of his body of work, and I encourage you all to view those films. But today he is here to guide us in a discussion around reparations and his work that he is now underway with on acts of reparations and a documentary film about that. And so I don't want to take up too much time of our time together, giving you a full history. I do encourage you to go read what was shared with all of us through our newsletter. So with that, I would love to turn it over to Macky and welcome you again. I'm just so excited that you could be with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Scotty. It feels like there's been a kids takeover of the church. Like we've gone from the basement to the upstairs and grabbed the pulpit, and y'all better be careful. I moved beyond words to be with you all today. I am thinking, be careful what we teach our kids. When I lived in Durham in 1968, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, it was a big time in the state of the country and in Durham and in the church. And I was just a little kid running around in the basement. And it's such a big question, what our kids learn, absorb, the good stuff and the bad stuff. And I remember two things I remember that are relevant right off the bat. One is that integration was the fight at the time as I understood it as a little kid. And so I was one of a handful of white kids at Lyon Park Elementary School. And that's where I first encountered the fact that there were so many Alstons in Durham, but I was the only white one that I knew. And that, of course, surfaced a question that I've been wrestling with ever since about the legacy of slavery and my own legacy, inheritance, and responsibility as the descendant of enslaver. And what it means to be in relationship with people who share the same name, with my neighbors, with, in some cases, my kin who are Black. So the other one is, I remember, Scotty, you must remember, Dr. Miss Keller, you must remember that there was this wild program, the creative arts program going on in the church at the same time that my mother was really involved in. And it's the first recollection I have of encountering the power of the arts. And at that time, at our church, arts and justice work were happening hand in hand in Durham, most certainly, but also in the church and in the lives of us kids. And we were invited to imagine a world, a better world, through paint and dance and music. And that's another thing that has never let me go. So I couldn't be more grateful to you all, to the church, which also raises the question of who is and what is the church? Is it who you were 150 years ago? Is it who you'll be in 150 years? And then what is our role as the church, as the body of Christ in the form of the church, to make the way for the generations to come that as best as possible embodies and incarnates God's realm here on earth, which is what I believe the work of repair is all about. So I'd love to share with you all an 11-minute video. And we've been doing, Selena, the co-director of this film, a friend of mine for 30 years with whom I've been making films for that long, and I have been doing these little reflection sessions as we're in the process of making this film, which is likely to be done in 2022. And I couldn't be more grateful for this invitation because it also helps us make a better film as we listen to you all respond to the work and just reflect. But I'm going to share this link. The way this has worked best in these sessions on Zoom in this dreadful time of isolation and pandemic, is to share the link with you in the chat. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share the link with you in the chat for this 11-minute video. And I'm going to ask, Scotty, if this works for you all, I'm going to ask that you watch it on your own telephone or computer, which for some of you may be difficult, but it's better than showing it to you on Zoom because video doesn't play very well on Zoom. So it's an imperfect set of options, but this is the one that's worked best for us so far. And while you're watching, just so we can tell who's still watching, if you can turn your camera off and keep your sound off. And then after you've watched, turn your camera back on, and that'll help us know who's done with the video. I'll put it, I haven't put it in the chat yet, so don't worry. The last thing I'll say is my name is Macky, which is short for McPherson. So I think it's just weird that you've asked me to participate in this lectureship, and I wonder if the other McPherson on the call is either Ken or the one for whom I ought to, the one who I ought to thank for this opportunity. But you know, it just again makes me wonder at how we name our children, how we name what's in a name. Alston was really the way I unlocked so much in terms of my own history, but I am honored to be given the opportunity to speak in this lectureship, and also tickled as McPherson myself.
Macky,
so, yes.
This is Libba, McPherson niece, and the lectureship is in honor of my parents and my grandparents, and we thank you so much. And I remember your dad very well growing up in the church. So we appreciate your presence with us.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. And like many, I've arranged with my family to talk as a family across the country. We're in Utah and Maine and New York at 6 p.m. on Sundays, Eastern time. So I'll be with my parents today at 6, and they don't know I'm doing this. They knew it was coming, but they don't know. And so I can't, they're going to be so delighted to know that we were together, and they send their love. Lane, my little sister, who was born in Durham, and my older sister, Charlotte, we're all well. And we're all grateful to First Presbyterian for all that you have given us throughout the years and in our, as kids, earliest years. All right, here's the link. Hope you like it. If you have trouble, stay on and we can chat and help you. Otherwise, click on that link and take your picture off and enjoy the little promo.
Well, I'll just start by saying that I wanted everybody to know, and I was texting with Macky while we were watching his clip of his film, that we have members of the Judeo Reform congregation with us, and I wanted to welcome all of them. I know some of you had been participating in a group with some First Presbyterian members. So thank you for joining us here with Macky today. And then again, to say thank you to the McPherson family for making this all possible. It's really a great opportunity, and we hope to welcome Macky back again when we can all meet in person, also as a part of the McPherson lectureship, so that we can invite even more members of the Durham community into this conversation with us. The lectureship is both to benefit our church community, but also to give us opportunities to reach out into the larger Durham community. So thanks again to them for making this possible. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Macky.
Wonderful. Just a question. I am receiving the request to admit people into the Zoom. Is somebody else receiving those?
Yeah, I am also, as I think maybe Mindy is too. So, yep.
Okay,
we'll
great.
Get them in.
Wonderful. So here's how the group of organizers thought we might chat now that I will reflect for about 15 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, and then ask you all for thoughts and questions for 15 minutes. And then I will guide us through a couple of reflection exercises, and then we'll be done at 1:15. So I hope that's all right. And, you know, I just love offering this clip up for those who were able to see it, for it means that you meet friends, you go to places that I've been having powerful experiences in, both my whole life and recently. And I get to introduce you to folks, which is one of the joys of documentary film. And you even saw my husband and my 2 children, Alice and Penelope and Nick, who might bust in this room any minute. So forgive us if we are disrupting in our New York City apartment. I think that the headline that I have to offer us and that I'm learning on the journey that I'm taking right now is that I believe I'm increasingly of the conviction that relationship-based reparation work leads to mutual liberation. I'd even say it's the only way. It's the only way we've got. And thank God we have a way. And I'm afraid that sometimes, and I know that some of you have read together Sandy Darity's book, From Here to Eternity, who I met with him and Kristen Mullen, their book. I met with them at Full Frame Film Festival last time I was down in Durham and was so taken by their work, by their inspiration, by their vision, and by their generosity of spirit engaging me. And I just want to name that reparations means different things to different people. And Selena, with whom I'm co-directing the film, we are very deliberately using the word reparation and not reparations. And we are thinking in regard both to Native Americans on this land and the genocide and the systems of oppression that grew out of colonization, as well as enslaved Africans who were brought to this country and their descendants, and then the systems of oppression that we live with now, that all people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color, white folk live with today. Reparations means something very specific in terms of a national move to repay and create programs to own, claim, apologize, a range of things to a range of different organizations who are very specific in what they mean. But what I've also grown to realize, because this project really grew out of a couple things, which I'll tell you about, but one was attending a lecture given by a scholar activist named Jennifer Harvey, who wrote books like Dear White Christians, a friend with whom I went to seminary who studied under Dr. James Cone, the founder of Black Power Liberation Theology at Union Seminary here in New York.
Do you have your camera on? No.
And Jen gave a talk. Okay. And if you'll mute, if you're not.
Just be the speaker, you can do that, change it. What?
Sorry, Macky, we need you to unmute so that I just muted everybody.
Oh, okay, thank you. So I went to this talk and Dr. Harvey Jen Harvey said, I've been studying anti-racism from a theological perspective as well as from a political and an organizing perspective for 30 years. But something's happening in this country over the last decade that has taken my breath away, she said. Again, I was just attending her talk. She said that there are projects going on all across the country, really not organized, not necessarily networked, not aware of one another, that are sprouting up and using the framework of repair, of reparation or reparations. And in very creative, innovative ways, Black people, Indigenous people, white people, all kinds of folks are coming together in relationship with specific guidelines about who leads, who follows, who's in the driver's seat and who's supporting. And I gotta say, she said, as I look at this work, it's the first time I can say I'm feeling hopeful in regard to the story of this country and we who live here, and healing around racism in this nation. So I went up to her afterward and I said, Jen, that's wild, how interesting. And would you be willing to introduce me to some of these communities that are doing the work? Because that might make for a good documentary film. And Jen is actually in the film. She's the person who has the nose ring and is in a group in Des Moines that's working on reversing the devastation of urban renewal in Des Moines and the flattening of the Black community by building a highway and building back a thriving Black community as an act of reparations. So we started following her and a bunch of other projects. But here's the thing that really got me going. I inherited our family plantation. That's a sentence that, that's a sentence. I inherited the family plantation, and my 2 sisters and my 3 first cousins inherited that house that you saw, if you were able to see it in the video, Penfield. And it is a sacred place for my family. It's where we gather pretty much every year, 100 or so of us Sanders on my mother's side of the family. You saw my mom in the little video. And while I had been wrestling with the legacy of slavery in all kinds of ways, that really brought it home, no pun intended, and made me recognize in such specific ways the ways that I have benefited financially and otherwise from this history, even as I was raised, as many of you all know, by someone who really, by parents who really stuck their necks out for civil rights. And still, I was the beneficiary of white supremacy and enslavement financially in this manifestation. This was just the undeniable manifestation of that, what do you call it, benefit? And so my cousins, our first cousins, said that they would like to steward the property. And so they offered to buy my 2 sisters and me out, which they did. And I took my portion of that and gave it as an act of reparations to a Black-led organization in the South that's based in Atlanta that also has a strong presence in Durham called Southerners on New Ground, a great intersectional organizing community. And they said, Macky, this is great. Thank you very much. Now, are you interested in going deeper? And I said, well, what do you, yes, I think that's the right answer. And they said, might there be other people you know who have similar histories and commitments who might want to do the same thing that you did, or be a part of the work of reparations, and might you organize within communities like your own, families like your own? So I met through, I sort of went through my mental Rolodex and remembered 3 people who have similar stories, who were interested in similar topics, quests, commitments. And we began to meet. We began to meet regularly, and now we meet weekly. And we went to each other's land, and we began to think with one another about how each of us could be agents of change within our families, within our communities, how we could meet Black and Indigenous people from where we come and ask them, what do you need? And then get our families involved. And when I did that in Penfield myself, everything changed for me and for my family, which you get little glimmers of in the video. So I went down and I talked to my family about what I'm doing, which is a scary thing, right? It's easier sometimes with our first film, Selena's my first film, Family Name, which was about the Alston side of the family, Black and white Alstons. I was on Oprah a couple of times. I would say that was easier for me than sitting down with my immediate family and having honest conversations about political differences. And in this relative season leading up to the election, to go down to rural Georgia and talk about reparations or even race and our family's history was scary to me. But I went down and I said, you know, I'm exploring what it means to inherit a plantation, y'all, and what our responsibility might be as Christians and as good people's neighbors. And my uncle, who's a Trump supporter, said, well, how can I help? And he said, I've been talking around town, which is of course scary too to me. And a guy next door to us in this real ghost town in Georgia, Penfield, Georgia, wants to talk to you. And so he took me over to this guy's house, and he was in his late 80s, completely lucid, but hooked up to a ventilator and had a bunch of illnesses, and said, I don't think I'm long for this world, and I need to get some things off my chest. And he told these stories of meeting formerly enslaved people, stories of racism that he perpetrated and witnessed and didn't stand up to or didn't apologize for. And one story he told was about a cemetery in Penfield that we didn't know about. On the other side of the wall, he said, where all our ancestors are buried, where I'm likely to be buried soon, is a forgotten, overgrown Black cemetery where there are formerly enslaved people and their descendants. And in the 1950s, he said, I'm on the board of the cemetery. We blocked access to anybody because people were getting into trouble back there. And I just feel terrible about it. And I don't want to die, nobody knowing. Y'all should go out and look at it. And so my Uncle Charlie and I went out, and fireflies were flying around, or lightning bugs. And we saw the tombstones peeking out and couldn't believe it. We had been going there all our lives. And even as children crawling on the wall around, never knew that on the other side of the wall were all these souls. So the next day, just coincidentally, I had scheduled to meet this African-American historian in town, Mamie Hillman, who was for 25 years had been working on creating an African-American truth-telling museum in the county, very rural county, Greene County, Georgia. And we had a great talk about all this. And she said, you know, Macky, you're from Penfield. I'm looking for this cemetery. I hear there's a cemetery. And I've been looking for it for years and years and years, and I can't find it. All these folks, Martin Luther King's grandfather, great-grandfather, could be buried there. Fascinatingly, I had no idea that they were enslaved in Penfield. This first representative in the Georgia Senate, House of Representatives, his family might be buried there, and I'm looking, and my jaw just dropped, and I said, Ms. Hillman, we found it last night. And she came out, and she said, well, I know what to do. And I said, can we help? She said, you better believe it. And then at my family reunion, 100 folks turned out to do the cleanup. And Mercer University, which was founded in Penfield, but moved after the Civil War and moved to Macon, their School of Theology students came down to do some cleanup. And Ebenezer Baptist Church folks, where Martin Luther King was pastor and Raphael Warnock is currently pastor, came down to figure out their own taproots in the Penfield community. And now it's likely that Mercer's going to pull that wall down, and that place is going to be a place, a sacred ground. They're going to steward it with Mamie Hillman's directorship. And we ran this GoFundMe campaign, and now Mamie has raised all the money she needs to open her museum, which is about to open. And I can't even tell you what's going on in my spirit right now, but the fact that all of this has happened, and now I meet regularly with my cousins across party lines, and we talk about stuff. And I'm 55, and we've never done that. And so there are possibilities in the work of repair. It's one thing to talk about stuff. It's another thing to roll up our sleeves together as led by Black leadership, Indigenous leadership. Last thing I'll say on this story is, just last October, with masks on, I went down again, met with Mamie, and folks from the Muskogee Creek community came to Penfield into the house for the first time. And we sat on that porch with Mamie and me and Marcus Briggs Cloud, his wife Tana, And we all talked about how this land was sacred for all of us and how to be in relationship and what justice looks like on this land. So Selena and I now are going all around and looking at projects that churches are doing, that towns like Asheville are doing, that institutions, colleges like Wake Forest are doing. And folks are doing all kinds of stuff. But then the question is, what can one do? What can we do? I'm a member of Judson Memorial Church in New York City. Got to go to church at 11. And we are thinking about what it means to do our own work, and have just engaged with Lenape folks from here in Manhattan. I had no idea until this work that New York has the largest urban population of Native people in the country. I had no idea. And you know, what we knew is the first thing to do was to be in real relationship and right relationship, and ask folks if there's anything we could do that could be of help. And as we're beginning to do that work, the answer has been yes. And that has felt really transformative for our communities. Similarly, I've been engaging with my seminary and other academic institutions about their histories. And just like Mercer University, it's thrilling to sort of audit what institutions am I connected to where I might be able to have a voice or a hand in getting right with history. You all, I'm sure, know the civil rights leader and lion, Ruby Sales. I remember hearing a talk that Ruby Sales was giving at Vanderbilt Divinity School at their public theology and racial justice conference that they do in the summer. And she was addressing in that moment the white folk in the congregation, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And she said, y'all, you don't have to get it right, but you do have to get to it. And I feel like that's what this film, what my life, what this invitation is to be in relationship, which is just the requirement, with folks who know firsthand what it is like to bear the brunt of white supremacy on this land. And then to do the work of healing and repair, whatever that looks like, in intersectional ways. I love that some of you have been doing that kind of intersectional study across gender and also in regard to race. So those are some thoughts. I love the framework of moral imagination. I love the notion that people are getting, as an artist, I love the notion that people are getting incredibly creative. Corinna Gould, the native person, Ohlone in San Francisco, has just thought up the notion that there could be a voluntary land tax in Oakland, that people could be invited to give $60 a year to the Ohlone community as a way of saying, I acknowledge that I'm on stolen land. And that program has worked so well that their nonprofit that serves the community is entirely funded by a voluntary land tax. How creative is that? And folks are giving them, willing them land, and they're gardening. And in that community garden, they're feeding all kinds of folks, Ohlone and others. So I'm thrilled by the way moral imagination can work. And then the last thing I'll say before we open it up to your questions is that I really do believe that this is soul work, and that for white folk, our souls are on the line, and that it is ancestral work, and it is for our children. My kids are of color. I have one child who's of Peruvian heritage and one child of African and Irish heritage. And so I know that I'm doing this for our children, for them specifically, but I'm also doing it for my cousins who are white, my nieces and nephews, and for the seventh generation, you know, all that. But I'm also, I don't want to meet my maker, y'all. If you all were right and that day actually might happen, I don't want to meet my maker and have God say, really, Macky, I gave you all that all that good fortune. And that's the best you could do. Going to another $100 meal, walking past that homeless person and this homeless person, gave you that history and all these opportunities to learn about it and good neighbors. And you thought it was just fine to. So I think our souls are on the line. But what I also come to realize is that joy is up in this work, and liberation in all kinds of ways. Miracles, joy, and liberation. So that's what I got. So any thoughts or questions that you'd like to offer? And Scotty, I don't know how you would like to facilitate question.
If folks want to put questions in the chat, that's one way we can, Lee and I can probably monitor that and put them out there. But also, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, I will note that Kathy Connor asked about the quote that you shared, Macky, you don't have to get it right, but you do have to get to it. Who was that from?
Ruby Sales. So if that's not a familiar name, just Google it. And she's an extraordinary person. There's extraordinary literature and documentary about her civil rights leadership.
Okay. So questions for Macky.
This is Emily. I have very little voice. What was your first aha moment? You mentioned, did you study at Union Theological Seminary? My dad was a professor there for years. Will Kennedy. Will Kennedy?
Oh yeah, I knew him very, very well. He was a very good friend of my grandfather's. Wallace Alston, same name as me and my dad.
Yeah, because we go back Georgia roots. I was thinking about my relatives in South Carolina and Georgia and Macon, where my grandmother on my mom's side grew up, and how my mom went back for a 25th anniversary of graduation from high school with this worldly knowledge from New York. And she said, you know, there was a Black high school here. Maybe next year we should have, or next, you know, in 5 years, we should have a reunion with both. And the white classmates of hers, she's now 92, said, Frances, you don't live here. And I'm wondering if you found any resistance, and you're talking about the discoveries that you've made, but how do you break down, how do you approach knowing that there might be resistance?
I love that question. And by the way, to whom, what relation was Dr. Kennedy to you?
I'm Emily Kennedy Wilkins. I'm his youngest daughter.
He was the kindest guy. I just want to say.
Thank you.
So I love your question. And yes, there's resistance. The deepest, most profound resistance that I've encountered is from my closest relatives and me. The deepest resistance is in my heart, no doubt. Fear, I don't want to, and the desire not to lose power, quite frankly, and screw up a good thing. That's a lot to unpack, but it's true. And I could talk a good game, but when it comes to those moments where I know that I might lose a loved one over a political difference, I mean, I came out as gay. That was hard. My parents told me, they asked me not to tell my grandparents because it might kill them, right? And I don't fault my parents. It was a tough time, age of AIDS, different time. In fact, I didn't tell them. And so for decades, I just stayed out of the South and was not in relationship, if you know what I'm saying. A couple of them died. And then I was making this movie, and my first film, Family Name, and I'm out in that. And before I was out on Oprah, I figured it was only polite to be out to my grandmother. And when I did that, and all this buildup, she just smiled and kept rocking in her chair. I said, Mima, do you hear me? Do you even know what the word gay means? And she said, Macky, come on. At this age, that you're happy and have somebody to love is all I care about. Let's talk about something more interesting. And I just named that story because it was decades of fear and a serious amount of lost relationship. And I actually believe that's at play across race, across all kinds of difference, political difference, and often in the family. So one has to be willing to play the fool. I have these pictures up around my room right here that I'm in of sort of the Dostoevsky idiot. And that's been helpful to me, just to be willing. And there's a Christ-like in some stories, manifestation of that, to be willing just to say stupid things, to bear the brunt of family ire. And I don't want to do that in a microaggressive racist way, right? That's not, but at the same, and so where we have certain conversations is a very important question. But sometimes in my body, I know the difference between when I'm chickening out with my family or community versus when it's appropriate not to step up. And then in terms of regionalism, yeah, absolutely. When I would come down from New York, there was frequently that imposter stuff. So it became very important to think about this not as an individual project, but to find those who were looking for me, in a sense. So Mamie Hillman, this African-American historian, I'm now on the board of her museum, and we talk every week, and we're just up in each other's lives, and our families are. And I can't even talk about how transformative, how meaningful that is to me. And, you know, my kid and I went down, my daughter, Alice Alston, went and down, and we painted her museum, and she interned for Mamie, and like all that kind of stuff. So, but in that way, then my work has been to flank Mamie's leadership in the community and not necessarily make it about me, but then with my cousins with whom I reunite, you know, regularly, for whom I'm not, yeah, I'm the Yankified, et cetera, words I don't hear, you know. I'm also the beloved. I'm a beloved. And so I have that access. And that's a real question for us, right? And I don't know who's all on the call, and whether we're Black or white or other, Indigenous, et cetera, whatever, how we engage folks and who we engage. I think that there, for white anti-racist organizing, there's this trope, you know, get your cousins. And I don't like that trope, because I think that, like, as you all Presbyterians might know, Walter Brueggemann would say, in that space where folks come together, everybody changes. There's transformation for everybody. And at the same time, I do believe that it's the right thing to do to be in relationship. And to be in relationship requires a certain level of honesty and vulnerability. And then what I love is the invitation that our churches, synagogues, mosques, gurdwaras, et cetera, invite us into, which is, what is the moral mandate? What are we required? What is required of us? And that's wonderful with my cousins, my Southern Baptist cousins, because I know their pastor and we're friends, and they love their pastor and I love their pastor, and we are able to engage even in regard to text across politics. And it's not always like that, but there are all kinds of opportunities. And even on that porch that you saw in the video, if you saw it, my mother, she's the matriarch of the family now. So what power, like doing an audit of where do we have power that we can put toward anti-racist work in ways that are a good use of power. That's meaningful. Who can reach the young folk? Who can reach the folk my age, whatever we are? So And not overstepping, not pretending you could do it all.
Thanks. Let's see. Leah has put in the chat, are there ways of talking about reparations, ways of opening or inviting people into the conversation that you have found useful, either for you or people you've been filming?
The thoughts that go through my head the immediate answer is no. There's not a go-to resource. There are so many resources, and some of you have studied From Here to Equality, which I loved, that book, Caste, which I loved. There's a lot of literature, but I have yet to find that one thing, because I think we're in a time where, while reparations and the reparations movement is as old or even older than this country, which is fascinating to learn about, I didn't know that, it means very different things to different people. And so my favorite strategy is to ask people, what does a healed world look like and how do we get there? And then to ask, what does repair mean? What does reparations mean? And it means different things to different folk. And so I'm on a learning quest. I'll say two quotes that are meaningful to me that sometimes I share. One is it may be apocryphal, but a quote of Desmond Tutu, and the quote is in the context of him telling a story about, so say you've stolen my pen and you're apologizing. And the quote is from this 2014 article, "I'm willing to forgive you for stealing my pen, and after you give me my pen back, I shall forgive you." So that's meaningful within the context of the South African struggle. And then I was attending I don't know if some of you all were sort of tuning in to the news cycle last week about the HR 40 hearing on Zoom or in the Capitol. HR 40 being that bill that's been considered for many decades that would require the country to study possibilities in regard to repair and whether or not it's possible in terms of slavery, reparations. And in the context of the reparations that the country has already made for Japanese Americans and in some senses Native Americans and in other cases. There was an earlier hearing that is actually in our clip a little bit when Ta-Nehisi Coates is speaking in the film. That was at that hearing. And afterward, there was a conference, and I encountered this sort of godparent of reparations, global reparations studies, a man named Hilary Beckles from Barbados, I believe. And Sir Dr. Hilary Beckles said this, offered up this framework that knocked me out. And it was that he believes that the 19th century was the century in which the global community really had the moral imagination, the ethical imagination, prophetic imagination to declare slavery immoral. There were dissenting voices, but that was the century of declaring slavery immoral globally. Slavery still exists, there's, et cetera, but that's where we sort of got it. The global community. He said in the 20th century, human rights became a sort of global framework with different parts, but through the UN and other institutions or networks, the global community embraced this concept of what it means to be human and what you deserve. What is your birthright as a human? And he said that the 21st century is going to be the century of reparations, that our ethical imagination is going to no longer believe it's okay to do harm politically, to do mass harm and not have to repair it. And that captured my imagination. I wonder if he's right. So those are some things that sometimes I find myself offering up to open up conversations. But then I've seen organizers, particularly this group called Jubilee Justice. And one organizer, Dr. Dave Ragland, who used to be leading a reparations campaign for faith-based organizations or houses of worship out of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, and now he's working with another network. He led this exercise with his colleague, a healer, an African healer named Yeye Tish, that I'm going to ask us to do now. It's another way of opening up conversation. So if you all will take a pen and paper or get something to write with, I'm going to ask you to write a little bit in response to 3 prompts. And again, this is an exercise I participated in, and it helped me. It helped the community that I was a part of. So the first prompt is, imagine in 10 years, the world healed of racism. Fix it in your mind. What would it be like on a street where you live? Would you live on a street? How would the economy work? What would we eat? How? With whom? Describe that on the piece of paper. Just write some words or phrases down that surface. Again, imagine in 10 years, the world healed of racism. Okay, now take a breath, put your pen down. It's just a beginning. We only have a couple minutes. So secondly, list things that you will do, concrete steps you individually will take, and commitments you will make for this future to come into being. What will you do? You want that world healed of racism. I know you do. So what will you do? What are you able to do? And I love thinking about this in a humble way. In other words, really? It's not just what should you do, but what will you do? And writing only one thing is perfectly great. But brainstorming is also good for me. And then picking something. And then the third question is along that lines, list things that First Presbyterian Church in Durham will do. Concrete steps you all will take and commitments you will make upon which this future depends. If you had your way. And I remember now that there are 2 church communities gathered here, as I understand it. So I think this question is about institutional engagement. So what might your church do? So now I invite you all, in whatever fashion feels comfortable, if it does, to, in a kind of popcorn style, share some of the things that you individually will do, or your church really could do. And you can say it, or you can post it in the chat. And sometimes it's that thing, Emily, about the courage of foolishness. Maybe you won't do it, but being out about it has its own power or thrill. So give it a shot.
And I'll say again, if you want to put it in the chat, I'd be happy to read it for you.
Scotty, what did you write?
So for what it would look like, I will live on a street with more people of color. I'm in a very, not completely, but very predominantly white neighborhood.
And is there an action that you found for you or the church?
So the action for me personally would be to continue to actively be in relationship with people, Black and of color, that have different lived experiences with me, and hear their stories and amplify their stories when possible, and if that's something they would like. I really liked your giving us the questions to sort of say, you know, here's who I am, how can I, you know, what can I do? You know, asking.
Anybody else?
So, yeah, I've had opportunities to live in mixed communities because we've traveled around. And what I wanted on my street was more diversity with music and smells of cooking and kids playing together. And then for my commitment is I need to open my door. I need to play my music, our music, and I need to sit outside so that I can talk with people as they walk by, and I can offer of my bounty. I say bounty because I was thinking food, but that might not be what is most pertinent. I might offer of my books or of things that I have in excess or in plenty. And there might be people who don't have those things who might walk down my street. So those are my commitments. Thank you for asking for us to make them.
Thanks for sharing. Is there anyone who might speak up on behalf of the church, or a hope for or charge for either of the churches?
Mindy, you want to say what you put in the chat?
Sure. I put have more one-on-one meetings with leaders of color in Durham. And that was, so that's, you know, my role is both church and home, but when we can, I think that also means having meals together in my home with those people, and not just meeting them in my office, but having them in a personal space of mine and with my family. I think concrete steps are getting to know the people in the public housing through Durham Can and through the work with affordable housing. So I think building those relationships and not just working at a distance for affordable housing, but getting to know the people and what their needs are. For me personally, of course, preaching on this and inviting leaders of color into the pulpit, preachers of color into the pulpit, and having teachers and seminars and things that open up more conversation.
What the sharing and the sequence of sharing is beautiful and exciting and so doable and centered around food, which seems so Eucharistic and also pleasure-filled. And that is so good. I used to work at Auburn Seminary in New York City, which is a leadership development shop for leaders of faith and moral courage, now multi-faith, but historically Presbyterian. And some colleagues and I ran a program in Chicago that was helping Black LGBTQ folks in Chicago and Black faith leaders be in right relationship.
Yeah.
And the program was called Table to Action. It was led by Lisa Anderson, an African-American womanist theologian and organizer at Auburn. And we created this amazingly long table and we served the gathered, and they just enjoyed and shared stories. There was no agenda. The agenda was getting to know one another, was really getting to know one another on an equal playing field, which is, of course, easier said than done. And we did this ritual at the very beginning where we asked people to introduce themselves by finishing the sentence, "I long for a Chicago where." And then during the meal of storytelling, two poets wove everybody's responses together. And at the end of the poem, read this poem of people's shared longings, or the longings they shared. And what was so exquisite about it was that nobody's longing was a supremacist longing. That there was room for all in this vision of the Chicago for which we long.
Right.
And the answers were so specific, Emily, like yours. Like one African-American lesbian wrote, I long for a Chicago where I'm sitting on my porch with my girlfriend, Cindy, and our kids are running around and we're doing theology and drinking sweet tea, and damn, I have a porch. That was her sentence. And it was so, people wept because nobody messed with their words. They were intact, but it wasn't just about them. There was room for all. So that's it. We got 1 minute. I thank you all. I'll throw a link or two in to stay in touch with us if you're interested, but also to learn about this museum to which I'm now committed in Georgia, and Mamie Hillman. And there's a little more video of her and her work there. And then this is, in about 2 weeks, our website will go live. But I'd love to keep in touch with you all if you want to keep in touch with us. So
you can count on it. We're going to be in touch with you.
Right.
I for sure am. And thank you again, Macky, for being with us. This has just been so insightful and pulls at my heartstrings on so many levels. And I appreciate you spending some time with us. On a personal note, I will say, tell your parents and your sisters I send my love and say hello. I do hope someday to get to see you all in person.
That will, for sure. Absolutely. And I look forward to being worshiping with you all in that church I know so well, though I see it as huge because I was teeny. But I remember going to visit Dr. Barber and in support of their work as a part of the work I did at Auburn Seminary, and looking down the street from the office of the North Carolina NAACP and seeing your cross and that modern part of your building. And my heart just broke in the best way that you're right there where it matters. So thank God for y'all.
All right, take care. Mindy, you want to say anything as we?
Thanks for being here. Macky, thank you so much. We look forward to further conversations. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Wow.
Bye.
Great to see you all. Take care.